What I want to do now is just to introduce the grandniece of Michael Collins, who will just talk to you about the family reflection on Michael Collins. So, Joan, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jimmy and Tom and all the 21 Society for inviting me here tonight. I'm always thrilled to be able to talk about Michael Collins, but I do feel a bit of a fraud here because all these people who have spoken before are involved. They're trying to make the country and the society a better place. They're involved in politics. They're doing something for their country, as Michael Collins did. I do nothing. All I am is, by an accident of birth, I'm here. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. And the other thing is, the family I came from, I'll tell you a little bit about that now, because last night my daughter-in-law Maria sent me this email, an extract from Michael Collins' The Final Days. In the latter half of the 17th century, the Collins family was evicted from their home in Limerick. They were troublesome even then and caused so many problems that the decision of the magistrate was to banish this unruly and troublesome clan to the nethermost regions of the King's realm, known as West Cork, where they and their descendants would never again cause any difficulty to His Majesty's men and women. In this they succeeded for a few hundred years, but after this lapse, Michael Collins made up for it. His achievements, I suppose, as a statesman, as an idealist and a pragmatist, as Bree just said, and above all as a peacemaker, have been well documented. Last night I counted 21 books on my shelves about him. The speakers here tonight have spoken very eloquently on his public persona. I'm going to just give you a little few. I know you're tired now at this stage, but I'll give you a few little anecdotes and something a little bit about his private, the private persona and the legacy that he left to us as a family. And one of the first memories I have is when we were young, we had a little dressing up box. And in the box was a soldier's cap and a belt and a coat. And we realised later that they were actually my mother's Uncle Michael's clothes, which now are in the museum in Cork, you'll be glad to hear. So first of all, my grandmother, Mary, was Michael Collins' older sister. She was about 9 years older. Now, when she grew up and got married, she had 9 children, of whom my mother was the 4th. And she was widowed very young, and her youngest baby was only 6 weeks old. And things were very hard, so I suppose she was lucky enough to get a job in the civil service. She had to go back to work. Now, Michael, her younger brother, took a great interest in the family, and he became a kind of a surrogate father to those children. They all spoke very highly of him, his fun and his liveliness and the presence that he brought to them and that. And he visited them a lot until it became too dangerous, really. But when we were growing up, we really didn't get any, there was very little talk about Michael Collins at school, as you said earlier, at school or at home. And as well as the facts about Ireland, there was a book written in 1966, which I have at home. It's called The Course of Irish History. And I just went through it last night. There were about, I think, maybe 3 lines about Michael Collins. But I have here actually an account written by my grandmother to me. She wrote it obviously when I was young, but I only got it a couple of years ago. She dedicated it to my grandchild Joan, and in the foreword she says, "One of my grandchildren, Joan, was asked a question in school some time ago. Who was Michael Collins? She answered, he was my granny's brother and he was killed. So she asked me to tell his story, and now in the peace of my twilight, I shall try and record my memories." So it has never been published or anything. It's about 20 pages. It's quite interesting. Then I come to my mother. My mother idolised her Uncle Michael. As I said, he was very involved in her family, so she knew him, she had memories of him, but she didn't really talk to us about him. And maybe what I say now will make it clear as to why she didn't. She lived in Cork, but she was sent to boarding school in Eccles Street in Dublin. And she really didn't like it. She was very lonely, very homesick. And Uncle Michael, as he was to her, as you know, was involved in treaty negotiations in London, and he used to return at weekends. And he used to go to school, to go to her school and bring her out and bring her over to her uncle Johnny's house in Dublin. And then on Sunday evening, when he was going back to London again, he would collect her and bring her back to school, and he would check on her progress, because her mother was working in Cork and her father was dead, so there was nobody really to take an interest in her. And then on the 22nd of August 1922, my grandmother and an uncle of mine went to the Imperial Hotel in Cork City to meet Michael, who was on his way to West Cork. He had a terrible cold, and she tried to dissuade him from going, but to no avail. And of course he met his death that evening in Ballinamlaw. And that was the day of my mother's 15th birthday. And when I think about that, I get very upset, because, you know, you all remember, you know, we all know what it's like to be 15 and to be excited and everything, and, you know, for that to happen. So I think that explains her reluctance to talk about that sad day and all that led up to it. But a few years ago, I suppose long after my mother had died, I asked an aunt, you know, why didn't she talk more about it? We didn't hear anything. It was only later on. And she just said, look, she didn't want to pass on the painful memories. She didn't want to pass on the bitterness of the Civil War, as you said earlier, family against family, town against town. And she had been babysitting for a family in Blackrock, and they told her, sorry, we don't want you anymore now after the Civil War. So it must have been terribly painful for her. And then, of course, in 1996, all changed, because the film came out. Now, it might seem a bit trivial, but the film did have a big effect on the family, I think, because we were at a special screening in Cork of the film, and it was just for the family and the extended family. And when the film was over, like, there was just total silence. And because there were people, there were sisters, aunts and uncles who remembered him, and they were just totally overcome. And at the reception afterwards, one of my aunts, when asked by Liam Neeson what she thought of the film, said, "You didn't just act the part, you lived it." I think Neil Jordan probably idealised Collins a bit in the film, I must say, and maybe he was a bit unfair to De Valera, but suddenly everyone wanted to talk about Michael Collins. It was a total revelation to me, because nobody had wanted to talk about him in school. We didn't know anything about him, we didn't hear about him, and then, as I said, at home, you didn't hear much about it. Well, I didn't hear anything either. I suppose, was particularly conscious of the effect the film had on young people, because at the time I was teaching French and German, and the students used to say, talk to us about Michael Collins. And of course I would be delighted, this is great, I can talk about him now, and I was finding out new things. But of course then I also realised that they were using diversionary tactics. Anything was better than doing French verbs or German grammar. And it just reminded me that I used to do the same, actually, because Maeve Binchy taught us for a year in Cork, and we used to try and get her to tell us stories. And she was a past master at that, and we delighted in her anecdotes, which beat doing Latin grammar any day. So I'm just thrilled to have this chance to ramble on about the big fellow and to give you some idea of what he means to us as a family. I suppose I would like to think that his legacy was a society that is non-denominational, non-sectarian, non-party, and that peace between countries and communities, which is what everyone has been talking about, is what we should all aspire to. No country or culture is better than another. No religion is superior to another, and we should all strive to live in peace and harmony. I mean, that's idealistic, I know, but in these difficult times, I think we should also remember maybe John F. Kennedy's words when he said, "Don't ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Gurv míle maith.
Joan, I just thought that was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And it's a bit like when you go somewhere and suddenly you discover something that was there all the time, but you didn't realise was there all the time. So I think it's great to have her living among you. And one of the things I would say, the Collins 22 Society will be very quickly on. They'll be very keen to publish that account, you know, because what we want to try and do is keep history alive. And there are a lot of things out of today that we discovered, or tonight that we discovered, that we want to try and keep alive, and we'll find the resources to do it. But I just thought it was great. If you're really probably scared now that I'm going to summarise all night, all those speakers and all those fine things that were said, I'm not sure whether we open to the floor now or we just conclude and we all go home. One or two, I'm sure, would like to ask questions, so I think maybe a couple of minutes for questions. I'm conscious of time. We won't delay you more than 10 minutes. There's a draw to be held. I'm told if I win, I can give it back. Johnny McCollum told me that, so we'll just take one or two questions.
I'd like to thank them, and particularly the speakers from Northern Ireland. I want to, in particular, however, to thank the two female speakers, because I think they brought a human dimension to Michael Collins tonight. First of all, the personal dimension to Michael Collins and his relationship with his family, and secondly, I think Paige brought home to us very clearly the reality of violence and what being a revolutionary really means in real terms. Now, when I came in tonight, I looked and I saw the fantastic iconography here of Michael Collins. That's Michael Collins, the revolutionary. But I think, and I want to direct my question here to Jerry O'Connell, because when Jerry hopefully will get the statue erected of Michael Collins in 1922 or in 2022, he will have a very difficult choice to make, because the choice will be, will it be Michael Collins, a politician, or will it be Michael Collins, a revolutionary? Now, Michael Collins was a brilliant revolutionary and a great soldier, but at the end of the day, he recognised that soldiering and revolution does not really work. You have to sit down and negotiate, and you have to be a politician. So I hope that in 2022 that will be remembered, and that Collins, the politician, the pragmatic, the negotiator, will take precedence over the revolutionary. Thank you.
About coincidences, because just that very issue we recently had in our party headquarters, where we were putting up a photograph of Michael Collins, and it was exactly that, politician or revolutionary, and obviously we went on the side of the politician. Other questions to be asked, and I give Jerry an opportunity to respond. Yeah, sorry. Declan, here.
Well, first of all, I could have said to my good friend Joan, you stole the show. my question, in a sense, follows on from the question that Elise has posed, and there's no doubt about it that Collins will go down in history as a great Irishman. His place is assured. But when he died in August of 22, he died a couple of weeks after another great Irishman, Arthur Griffith, died. And Collins at that stage, of course, was Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Chief of Staff. And the man who took over from him was Richard Mulcahy. And Richard Mulcahy had to take all the flack, the outpouring, if you like, from the Civil War. And my question to the panel, to anybody in the panel, maybe Jerry would take this up when he's replying to your issues, to what extent did the legacy of Collins underscore what Irish history thinks of Richard Mulcahy?
Okay, we'll take one more question, then maybe we'll ask Jerry inevitable task of responding on behalf of all of the panel. One other question, if there's another question? Maybe not. Is there a, no? No, that's it. And then we'll have the draws, who has the tickets, and we'll get it ready. So Jerry, this is a hospital class.
All right.
And I was told not to mention Michael Collins of the GA, but he was very involved in a club called the Geraldines in London, so I got it in anyway.
Thanks very much for the question, both questions. I'll take Mulcahy first, if that's okay. I think there's a certain truth in what you're saying. I mean, Mulcahy was Mulcahy wrote in the aftermath of Collins's death, and by the aftermath I mean the last 24 hours after bail and law, the famous speech to the army where he said to people, stand calmly by your posts and do not dishonour our great leader. I mean, Mulcahy played an absolutely critical role the day or two after bail and law to ensure that the country didn't descend into utter anarchy, and that there wasn't there was no reprisals for Michael Collins' death. Now, Breed Rogers spoke very eloquently about the horror that was the Northern Troubles, and a lot of that was the tit for tat element. Michael Collins' assassination, probably the most significant political killing of the War of Independence. There were no reprisals, and I think a lot of that has to do with Mulcahy's utter discipline that he imposed upon the National Army. That's something that doesn't particularly ever get discussed or he's honoured for. And I think as well, Mulcahy sometimes the formation of the first inter-party government in 1948 and the fact that he stood aside, he could have insisted about becoming Taoiseach. He was president of Fine Gael after the 48 general election. There was a massive coalition. You had everyone from Clonard Talún, the new Clonard Public, the two versions of the Labour Party, a Fine Gael party that was emaciated in that general election, down to about 19% of the vote, but still managed to come back and seize power. And Mulcahy threw it all away. He threw it up and he said, look, there's people like Sean McBride who, were on the different side to me in the Civil War, and he said, I cannot, I can't expect people I can't expect me to be the physical obstacle to the formation of a change of government. And he stood aside for Jack Costello, and that inter-party government was formed. So I think Mulcahy's legacy, you used the phrase underscored. I think it certainly is absolutely underscored. And there's been no real proper, definitive biography done of him. As a Lithuanian historian, actually, who has written the best work on Mulcahy. But the greatest scandal of all about it was, and I discovered this in Granard, the last Collins night we had before we came here was in Kitty Kiernan's home place, the Greville Arms Hotel in Granard, where the Kiernan family were born and reared, and was the place of business of the Kiernans and the Kiernan sisters. So we were in Granard 3 weeks ago, and a man came up to me afterwards, and he said, you're from Tipperary, I'm from Killinall, I'm just outside Thurles. And there's a graveyard on the old Dublin Cork Road called Ballymarine Cemetery, between the parish of Littleton. Mightn't mean much to most people here. But Mulcahy is buried in a very nondescript corner of that cemetery. No state recognition whatsoever. No flag, nothing. Nothing to commemorate the fact he was Commander-in-Chief of the Army, absolutely nothing. And a man said this to me, he said, is there anything that can be done about this? Now, obviously, his family are still alive and, it's a family issue, but it would truly shock you to see how Mulcahy is remembered. And I really think that the government or somebody should step in there, and the army. He was a commander-in-chief of the National Army, and he was the man I would hold responsible for keeping keeping a lid on the sulphuric levels of reprisal and recrimination that could have got out there the week after bail and law, and you could have been talking about multiple casualties. But I totally support where you're coming from there. I personally like to see something done about his grave for a start. Anyway, it's a solid disgrace that the man is effectively, you wouldn't know who he was or what he was. In relation to Ailish's question of the statue, my personal preference would be for him to be depicted in civilian dress. His military, iconography is a good word, because the word an icon effectively is something that we channel our reverence towards, but it really is only an artistic representation of a person. It's not the real person. Joan Murphy spoke about the real person. The legacy of Michael Collins is multi-layered, from the Gaelic revivalist in London, the GAA administrator, the person who took the Count Plunkett side in 1916 in the GPO, the Minister for Finance, National Loan, Intelligence War, all of that, and the negotiator, the political leader, the campaigner. I think the most compelling images of Collins, and what I would like to see represented if that statue ever becomes a reality, are the famous, and I think, Tom, we actually donated a picture to Fine Gael a few years ago of him, the famous rallies that took place in that treaty election. The treaty election of June 1922, when the treaty settlement was put before the people, following the Dáil vote. And those massive rallies, hundreds of thousands of people, well, maybe not, but maybe about tens of thousands of people, maybe up to 100,000 people, like in Patrick Street in Cork, in O'Connell Street in Dublin, in the square in Thurles, wherever, gathering to hear Collins and gathering to hear De Valera speak. The two great leaders of that period. And you know, you've Collins there dressed in the three-piece suit, and he's slashing down on the hand, and that's the image I would like to see him depicted as. He is selling his political settlement, or his vision of a new Ireland, to the people, and that's democracy. And that's the most important thing I think about Collins, is he made democracy possible in this country. And it's that depiction I'd like to see depicted. But
Okay.
it's for others to decide.
Thank you very much. Just to say